Welcome to the Ask the Pastor podcast. I'm Pastor David. I'm joined here today by local author Jim Woods. And Jim, we're glad to have you with us today. And we're going to learn more about Jim. He's written 4 books, and they are available on Amazon. The link is in the video description today. And Jim, if you wanted to share with us about a few of the books that you have written.
Sure. Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me. A few that I've written are I've written a couple productivity books. One of them I actually have the visual aid, Ready, Aim, Fire, which is a book about goals and very practical. I wrote it, oh my goodness, about 10 years ago now.
Wow.
Probably more like 10 or 11 years now. And I also have another book, Focus Booster, again, more productivity, kind of before I went into fiction. And then I have 2 novels. The first one's Bite the Bullet, which is a crime novel. This one I wrote 3 years ago, published it. And then I have the newest one is Like a Bad Memory. There are alternate covers, so if you see it on Amazon, that's what's going on. And yeah, I'm working on another novel right now, and I have a few more books on the back burner as well. So
Okay.
it never stops, David.
No, it never stops. That's life. And so your next novel, is that connected to these first two?
Yeah, it's going to be a trilogy, tentatively titled "Pull the Trigger," which that's where I am right now. I literally was just editing it just a second ago before I talked to you. And I'm really close on that. I honestly think August could be maybe late August, depending, but I think August is doable. So.
Okay. And you said you were just editing it before you were talking to me.
Yeah.
So it's just always happening. It's evolving.
As a parent, you're constantly working on things, and I'm trying to get better about working in little bursts and being okay with like, hey, 5 minutes. As long as I know where I'm going, I'm literally working on the specific chapter toward the end of the book. I'm like, okay, I know where I am. Why not? And I know I'm going to do a lot better on that than like trying to work on my phone.
Yes.
So I'll pull up my computer, and also I wasn't connected to the Wi-Fi here, so that helps too. But less distraction on that. I was just going through just a little bit of dialogue polish here or there, and I use this app called Scrivener. A friend shared with me, and it's like as you edit, it changes the color of the text. And that really excites me. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it stands out and it feels like progress or something.
Okay. Yeah.
It's nice.
So it's just little bits at a time that you do. Like,
when you have time. If I have more time, great. But yeah, even a little bit, I'll just try as much as I can. Fitting it in the margins.
Right. Yeah. I think that's, for a lot of people our age, is how we work today. It's just little bits at a time. It's intermixed between parenting, living life, working. You just have a few minutes here to do this job, and then I'll do something with my family, and then come back to this.
Yeah, like I shared with a friend last night. I said literally, I'm editing my novel while my kids were watching Empire Strikes Back.
Right.
And most of the time, I'm a little less focused, but I think I also know I'm close enough to the finish line. That might help a little bit more with the focus there.
Right.
But yeah, it's like perfection is a myth. Don't assume you can achieve the perfection, and just do the best you can. And I mean, sure, I could be doing other things, or I can work on something that really matters to me.
Right.
Might as well do that work.
Do what you want, and that's the thing, you can do it like while you're watching something else. You can work on it when inspiration strikes, and you can just put a little notes in there or edit it a little bit, and then you see it progressing.
Yeah, and that's why the color. That's why I'm flipping out. And like, I literally just learned about this in the last month, where it's like each revision, like white is the original text, then it was red for round 1 of revision, and then blue. And so my document looks like the American flag now. It's all red, white, and blue. And I'm like, but I can look at it and say, oh, that was original. That was revision 1. That was revision 2. And I pulled up a page last night. It was like all red. I was like, oh, this is newer. This was just added. And it's I think it's almost like leaving breadcrumbs
Hmm.
for yourself so
Right.
you can focus a little more there.
Hmm.
Um, literally just in a call with a client the other day, and I said, yeah, I think the more breadcrumbs we can leave to kind of find our way back home, that
Hmm.
helps so much. When
Right.
go set out to do something in your email, guess what? It's like really hard
It
because
is.
you're getting distracted with all the other new emails, right?
Right. Yes.
Um, you want to send an email, you might be better off typing out what you want to type.
Somewhere else,
Yeah,
and then
and then
pasting it.
paste it. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
because all these
Because
other
as a
distractions.
kid, I mean, how many times you do that? I do it all the time. I'm like, oh,
Yes, and it was the email I was going to send when I got on here. That probably had a high priority, but now I've lost it.
it's
It's everything else. But the little breadcrumbs, and especially when you're writing a story, you
yeah,
got to know where you're going and where's the ending going to take us compared to
yeah,
where it started.
yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yes, yes, totally agree with you.
So how long does it take you to kind of develop a book or to publish a
Boy,
book?
you know, it really varies. Um, the drafting, the writing it isn't usually the long part. The harder part is the editing. How many rounds of
Right.
editing and revision? Um, I can write a book pretty fast, like in a few months, but is it good enough? Does the
Right.
story make sense? Is it
Hmm.
coming together?
Right.
That could take a year.
Right.
But I'm also working on really speeding up the process because, like we just said, perfection is a myth. If you're working with a great editor, which I work with some great editors, that helps too. It's like
Mhm.
less on your shoulders.
Right.
So I wish I could answer you great like that's just this much time, but it really depends on the project.
Right.
Like my first book, this this came together really fast. It's actually not that many words. It's a really short, like flip through it book.
Mhm.
I think it's only like 15,000 words, Ready and Fire.
Right.
Whereas I'm not worried about dialogue or character development or
Hmm.
locations or anything like that in a nonfiction book. So yeah, it kind of just depends on the project, is what I would say.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's also too, are you doing a lot of other things, or is that like your
Or
one
if that's your full time job, only responsibility.
Yeah, it's different, right?
Right.
Like if you're heavy on other tasks and duties, it really just depends. I will say though, it's about that whole perfectionism thing. It's just so easy to like almost treat it like a treadmill or a hamster wheel.
Hmm.
And is it ever really good enough? I struggled with that
Yeah.
because I was like trying to write like the most amazing novel I could possibly write.
Hmm.
And I even like went to Chicago and I was looking at scenes. I was treating it like a movie
Right.
in my head that I wrote out on paper. And I think I probably went a little overboard, frankly. But
Right.
I, hindsight 2020.
Yeah. Well, and it's something that you're proud of that you put time into,
Oh
and
man,
so you want it to be the best you can do. But also you have to
right?
realize this could be edited into eternity.
Yeah.
Um.
Oh, it
But
makes me think of The Catcher in the Rye, one of my favorite
mhm.
books, where Salinger wrote it for like 10 years.
Right.
And it's like, because he spent so much time on that, though, he didn't publish any others. And it's like,
Right.
I think sometimes it's almost like you're wanting to create something that's way bigger than you. And
Hmm.
it's like, I don't know. I don't want to say it's fool's gold because it's so hard to do, but you just, I think sometimes just hindsight's 2020, and we can say, oh, I could have been done with that quicker.
Hmm.
It would have been,
Right.
90% there. I spent a year on that 10%.
Yeah.
But you learn and you grow,
You
right?
learn, and so next time okay, I don't have to travel
Right?
all the way
Yeah,
there.
I do want to go back. I love
Yeah.
Chicago. It was fun just wandering,
Right. Yeah.
finding new locations. But uh, yeah, it's. I think sometimes we can do more than we think we can.
Hmm.
Um, have some boundaries, have some
Well, I think that's
deadlines.
it. Have some structure around what we're doing here, what we can do. So your first book was Bite the Bullet,
Yeah,
and that was set in Chicago.
yeah,
That's why you went there.
yeah. in my first one, it was so wild and like my first real fiction that I shared, and it was gritty and raw and like
Hmm.
not pulling any punches.
Hmm.
And I was embarrassed and scared to put it out in the world because that's foul language, but
Hmm.
it's like authentic, and it's like I've worked with police before and I know how cops talk. And so it was just really weird to kind of tell a story that was so not censored, I guess.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and it made me laugh. I was like, the only pushback I ever get is from my kids. They're like, Dad, you wrote bad words. And I'm like, no one else cares because it's like, it's about characters, it's about
Right.
redemption, it's about the story itself. It's
Hmm.
not so much about, I guess, the aesthetics in a
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and like we have it pulled up on the screen on Amazon, and so it's about Chicago cop um, to make a difference, but then all that has been shattered for him, as life is.
yeah, I think I've heard the story, David, that or the expression that all stories are redemption stories.
Hmm.
And I've always loved that, and it's like I think that applies, and it's like having broken, flawed characters making lots of mistakes. We can almost relate with that more
Hmm.
than having. I mean, think about it. People like Batman a whole lot more than Superman
Exactly.
in general, and
Yes,
people love Darth Vader often more than Luke.
because you learned a story
Yeah,
about
and
Darth
it's like
Vader.
these are flawed
Yeah,
characters that are, Vader definitely a bad guy. Batman, is he good or bad? Because some people are like, he's a criminal, he's a
that's why I like Batman, because it's kind of like the gray area. You don't know. Like he could potentially be either one either day,
right.
depending what the scenario is.
Yeah, and it's as you say that, I remember I was writing just a fictional story, and I thought, you know what? It would make a lot of sense if Batman would get hooked on painkillers. So I started writing it, and I was like, this is interesting. I've never heard this twist on Batman because
Mhm.
everyone's like, he's the greatest detective and all this. And, it's the opposite of the Adam West Batman. But I was like,
Right,
wouldn't it make sense that he would get hooked on painkillers because he's getting beat up like
right,
every night?
hmm,
And then I looked and I found, yeah, there was a comic on this, that whole exact same story.
right.
And I was like, wow, that's interesting. You
Hmm.
know, I
Yeah,
didn't keep going with it, but just the idea, I was like, this
right.
would make a lot of sense
Wh-
because, what do you mean, the guy is kind of like a vampire.
Yeah, yeah.
He's, not active during the day, basically up all night.
Doing something, either fighting crime
Uh,
or in the nightlife.
yeah, exactly. And I'm like, wouldn't it make sense though if he would have a problem?
Mhm.
And like, what would that look like? Like,
And like with Superman is not human. He's not from here, so he has all the tools he needs to fix everything. Batman doesn't. He has to use his brain,
yeah,
like the rest of us. He has to figure this stuff out,
yeah,
and so Batman would be connected. In a lot of us, if we had the money that Batman has, or Bruce Wayne has,
could be
we would do those things. We would fix the world
right,
if we had all that at our disposal, but we don't.
right,
But he does.
right.
And what else would you do if you could?
If you have, I mean, what else? I mean,
You have all your needs
family
met.
justice, right?
You have all your needs met. You have a great house. You have a butler. You can pretty much make anything you want to make.
Yeah.
What is left to do in life?
Especially if some of that stuff's already made for you, waiting to be used. In
Yes.
the Nolan Batman, it's like, hey, here's the tumbler. Hey, here's this, uh, rock, whatever that rock climbing
Right.
apparatus, and
Hmm.
like all that. It's like this is right here. Yeah, why not? Okay.
Yeah. So it's the story of a hero, and in any situation, he can go one way or the other. And sometimes you wonder, would I
Yeah,
do that too if I was like he has a code that he doesn't kill anyone? But there are times you wonder.
yeah, yeah. Well, even that I question because it's funny. You watch some of the old movies,
Right.
read some of the books. It's like, where did that really come from? Because it's not very accurate. I think it was maybe the Adam West Batman
Yeah.
thought of it's, silly and cheesy. But if you watch the old original, like
Mhm.
Michael Keaton, dude strapping bombs to clowns and like kicking them down, and then big boom, and
Yeah.
I'm like,
And that's more of a like interpretation of who's doing that movie
yeah,
that he doesn't kill.
yeah,
But in some, it's pretty dark. Of
right,
he's on the verge of
right.
showing a lot of stuff.
I and I I think there's something about, people call them anti-heroes,
Mhm.
but it's often heroes
Mhm.
with problems, with
Mhm.
vices,
Right.
like non-conventional heroes.
Mhm.
And it's, I think that's where it's like there's such an attraction to it because it's like a twist on it.
Mhm.
And I think that's the Batman. It's
Right.
like, okay, this guy has clearly decided I'm going to deal with all my issues by beating up criminals.
Right.
That's how I find justice. And
Mhm.
it's like, instead of him going to a therapist or doing, focusing on philanthropy
Right.
or doing more positive outlets, it's almost like, hey, this is a fantasy, and we're just going to watch him beat up all the bad guys and do the things that we all wish we could
That we
do.
wish we could do.
Yeah,
If we could do that, that's what we want to do, is beat up all the bad guys in our lives.
right,
But we can't,
right,
because one,
right.
it's not legal, it's not safe,
Be-
and we really can't withstand that physical beating every night.
Right,
But he does it for us,
right.
so you connect. And so, I think you talk about in your story that it's raw. That's what people relate to. Is that this is life happening? Life is not easy for most of us.
It really isn't, and I think we can relate to the flawed characters. And
Mhm.
I like, my character is an alcoholic in
Mhm.
Bite the Bullet. In the second book, he's in recovery,
Right.
and it was such a, like, I had to study a lot of that, and like,
Right.
I've worked as a writer, writing for rehab clinics, and a lot of that came into play with Bite the Bullet.
Mhm.
So it was like all these other experiences
Right.
came and then kind of funneled toward my fiction.
Mhm.
And I just even noticed, it's like, what you think the story is about, there's probably something else underneath it.
Right.
So for my current one that I have, Like a Bad Memory, this book, it it's something a lot of people can relate to. Even you have it, David, where it's like, I'm struggling with this book, my job versus my family.
Mhm.
That was my struggle when I
Right.
wrote this book. Like,
Mhm.
which takes priority, and you have to pick.
Right.
Like, and so once I kind of cracked the code, if you will, and said, okay, the relationship with the father and son is the real story here.
Mhm.
Like, that's the real heart of it, the core. I was like, oh, okay. Now I have context. But I was really battling through that. And I'm like, which am I picking? So my character,
Right.
literally a Chicago cop, going, okay, do I stay on the job or do I quit from my family?
Mhm.
I was kind of sorting
Yeah.
a lot of that out in the book. And
Mhm.
I didn't necessarily come to the greatest conclusion, but isn't that how life
Well, that's
works?
how most of. I mean, it's
Right?
trying to find this balance between, our family and our work, but we got to have work to survive. But also, we're passionate about our work. I think people who become police officers, they really want to make a difference in the work.
Yes. They're
Mhm.
doing it for the right things. I think,
Yes,
and
you get in for
by
that, but then it
far.
changes. Life
Yeah.
happens, and so that.
And that's kind of what I was doing with my story. And I studied the psychology of police, and that was part of why I wanted to go to Chicago. Like,
Mhm.
what are they seeing? What are they
Right.
experiencing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And like, that would be really, really hard in a big town like Chicago. I mean, I think it would be hard anywhere.
Mhm.
And I even went through some police academy. They have a local one here in the
Right.
Falls, and I went through it, and I'm just seeing and learning more from their perspective, not
Right.
just our outside perspective. It was
Mhm.
like, wow, that's probably the hardest job up there. I mean,
Especially in Chicago, I imagine it's extremely
right?
hard,
Southside
harder than anywhere
Chicago. I
else.
said, let's go for the real
Yeah, anywhere else. I mean, it's
toughest
hard being a
place.
police anywhere, but in South Side of Chicago, the hardest of the hard. But we all have that struggle of trying to balance work and family.
Yeah,
And how does that play out? And you share, your character has, he battles alcoholism.
yeah,
And so, where does that dynamic come from? How does that play into these things? You have a stressful job,
right,
and so how do you cope
exactly.
with all of that?
Because we all, I think, like, that's one story thing I always ask about writers, and I'm like, well, what's their vice? What's
Mhm.
their vice? I think every single character
Right.
has to have a vice.
Mhm.
I don't care if it's, playing Tetris on your phone,
Right.
or chewing a toothpick or whatever. I think everyone has a vice, so
Right.
they're doing something. And I mean, maybe it's lottery tickets. I don't know. It depends on the character, but I kind of like that. It makes them more human
Yeah.
to have their own
Mhm.
vice there.
Yeah. We watch TV characters, those who have real struggles and real vices and real ways of trying to cope with it.
Yeah.
That's who you relate to. I think if you watch like House MD,
Yeah.
people could relate to him
Right.
because he was raw,
Yeah.
but also he was a drug addict. He had Vicodin and he had a physical pain, physical ailment that he
Yeah.
had to live with. There was no,
And so you could almost justify as
yeah,
an audience, be like, oh, he's in pain. Oh, and I think like that physical
right,
problem was like almost like justification. And he was also telling, and also he was very rarely wrong. So we like that
yes,
about him.
yeah.
It's a fascinating
So you
character,
could see it.
fascinating show.
You could see the psychological development in him dealing with this pain. Like, oh, yeah, I've been in pain, so it also drives you to do better. You're dealing with a pain that just won't stop.
Yep.
You want to be the best. You want to show that you can cope with it.
Yeah.
But also, he had his vice of Vicodin
Yeah,
all the
just
time,
popping them.
like they're candy, and you're like, you know,
I think for most of us, there's something attractive about that person who is so flawed but still so good at their job.
hmm
And it's like it's a common anti-hero thing, but in general, it's like if they take that vice and almost the more they crank it up, the more you care.
hmm right,
And if they're doing bad things and making bad choices, as an audience member, you're kind of cheering for them, but also like, no, don't do that. No, don't do that.
right, because it's wrong. But you're like, well, in their case,
Right. And
it could
it's
be that.
almost like it creates a audience character soap opera.
hmm
Like it's give and take, and you're just kind of like you're cheering for them. And some people won't cheer. Some people will be like, no, they crossed the line. And then some people will be like, no, they didn't cross the line. That was rationalized. That was justified. And I think it almost resonates with different personalities a bit more.
hmm
I like Breaking Bad, and I felt
Right,
like that show was really well done, and it was kind of an inspiration for me, like to
right.
an extent. And I was like, a lot of people were like, no, no way. And I'm like, but it was for his family.
Yeah, like I never actually
You can
watched the
argue that,
show, but I was like, I can't watch that show. But then I looked at what it was about
Yeah,
and how he came into doing that, and you're like,
right. You're like, he's a
okay,
chemist. He's a chemist with cancer. It's for his family.
yeah, I don't agree,
His
but
wife is pregnant. All
I could see where he went down that road because it was just about drugs. I can't watch that show. But then I read background like, okay,
Yeah.
so now I understand why he's making those choices.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, so he's a real person, and if any of us are in those circumstances, I'd say don't judge people by the choices they make when you don't know what options they had available for
Yeah,
them.
I think that's a
So,
that's a
you learn more about the character behind, okay, what he's trying to do that. So you could never relate to it. I think that's why the show was so popular,
I
Breaking
think
Bad.
so.
You could relate to his struggle.
I'm not saying the character's exactly the same, but isn't that kind of a Robin Hood aspect to an extent where,
Right.
robbing from the rich to give to the poor, if in theory in Breaking Bad he only sold to super rich people
Right.
to help his family
hmm
and had like a no guns rule and had some real rules in place, would the ends justify the means? Maybe for that character, probably to we're again in real life is one thing, is completely two versus fiction where it might be more like a parable or
Right. But there's always in fiction, there's some foundation of truth in real life and fiction. And so you could see in Breaking Bad, I don't think I would do that, but in that circumstance, it's an intriguing dynamic.
The funniest thing behind the scenes, Dave, because I'm a geek. I dive in deep with stories. It's like the guys who wrote the show, they were joking because they were writers for like X Files and other shows, and they were out of work. And one guy goes, "Well, we can become Walmart greeters." And he goes, "Hey, I heard this one guy's selling meth out of his RV." It was just on a joke. Like they were just kind of talking to each other out of work. And they're like, "Hey, that might be an idea for a story."
Right.
And that's kind of the seeds that grew the story.
Right.
So you never know where that little idea could just blossom and grow.
Yeah, and it's real life things that these things happen. and people, and that's how you can connect to the characters, either on TV or in books. Is, I can kind of see their struggle. I can relate to that
Yeah.
and the decisions that they're making, even if I don't agree with all the decisions.
Right.
I kind of see the justification in it for them.
Right. Little story tip. Again, this is a Breaking Bad thing, but one thing the writers did, which I've taken this and put it in my toolbox. Where is this character's head at?
Mm-hmm.
What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And then you can kind of make decisions as that character. And it's just a little sentence where you fill in the blank where it's like, oh, well, this character, they just got an eviction notice. They're freaked out. They're,
Right.
not thinking clearly. All of a sudden, that empathy kicks in. You can see, yeah, I can see why they did this because this was their situation.
Right.
And I think that's what we're kind of really hitting on.
Yeah, and that makes compelling story and character. No one wakes up thinking, I want to become a drug addict today, get addicted to drugs, or I want to start a drug business. It's just life leads up to these things, and you have no other place to go, and you see this as a way.
Yeah, the conflict hits you.
Yeah.
It comes at you from different angles.
So you're not like, well, today I just want to start all this. I want to ruin my life, starting this drug, lose my family. And so even like in Bite the Bullet, he's going through some things with his family and some loss in his family.
And also too, I like the background. I didn't dive deep into this, but you like when you start reading Bite the Bullet, I come into the story fast, like a freight train, where like he's a bit bitter and disgusted with how the system works in the first chapter.
Right.
He's not a bad cop, but he's bitter and cranky about it. Where they're juking the stats. That's the expression for it, like faking the stats.
Right.
The politicians would do that and focus on this story over here, while this is behind the scenes. This is the real story.
Right.
And that would wear you down if you're seeing on the street, this is the truth, and then the big wigs come out and say, no, look over here. We did all these arrests. We did all these good things, but you're seeing the other side of it. And it was just an interesting angle. Like that would wear you down. You're going in to fight the good fight, and you're not winning. You're not making the progress you want.
Right.
Especially with like the drug crisis. And it was hard. I mean, both these books were really hard to write because I didn't want to pull punches. I wanted to talk about the grief, the loss, the problems that we face. It was really gut wrenching to like write a lot of those scenes because it's like you got to go all the way. You don't want to just kind of skim the surface. So it's like when one of my characters dies, especially by the bullet, because I didn't pull back on that at all. It was hard to write that stuff where, just knowing the weight of it all. It's not like I haphazardly said, okay, this is just all a big video game and bang bang pew pew.
There's no second chances. There's no more life left.
I was thinking too, like these are mothers, and brothers, and fathers, and sisters. So.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of police officers, they want to help make the world a better place for their community, but once you're there, you realize it's not a perfect system. It's very corrupt.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to do the right thing. They don't always get the support they need to do their job on the street.
Especially with, as I really learned more about the drug crisis and gangs and all that, it was, you're outnumbered. And also, just even the other side of it, not just the police side of it, the gang side of it. Well, if your mom's going to get evicted and you have nowhere else to turn and no one's going to hire you, like that other kind of angle of it, again, like you said, it's really easy to kind of make quick judgments, but have you walked a mile in those shoes? Right. I do paint the gangsters as the quote-unquote bad guys in my books, but at the same time, that line gets really blurry between, the gangsters and the police, especially when the police are making really bad decisions with my main character.
Right.
It's so much of it is like, what's your family environment? What's your personal financial situation?
What access do you have to things? Work, jobs, food, and especially as a young man, you have a weight of that responsibility to
Yeah.
care for your family, but you don't have any work opportunities. But there's this gang who will
Right.
welcome you.
Right.
You can get those things that you
Yeah.
need. And then even with the selling drugs in the gangs, it's quick money
Yeah.
for
Crazy.
people.
And I mean, like, I've done so much research in the background on some of this. It's like, well, yeah, if you can turn $100 into $10,000,
Yeah,
I mean,
you know,
if someone's offering you that, it's like,
and you got you have you have kids, you have babies.
or,
I got to feed them,
and,
care for your
and
parents.
I kind of, I'll be honest, I again, this is a real life situation, but like one of the characters loses a loved one to an overdose and bite the bullet early on.
Mhm.
There's a lot of bills,
Yeah,
all from that, and it's like, if my character were to like make a choice and take some money from the gangs to pay his sister's hospital bills for her deceased son, I know I'm treading that very, very
right.
gray line, but I'm also kind of like, if he doesn't have enough money, yeah, it's just, I know I'm playing on that gray line, but there's a lot of gray, I think, in some of these areas with
Well,
story, especially.
yeah. Well, life is not black and white.
Right?
It's all gray for us. Of what decision do we make?
Right?
Yes, if I take this money, they'll just pay it off.
Right?
But then I'm connected to this gang now.
Right? Yeah.
But who do I want coming after me?
Fair.
The bill collectors are going to be coming. They're going to be nonstop.
Right. Right.
So it's a tough decision. And if you don't have these other options, probably not having insurance.
Yeah. Oh, that's not even on the page.
So yeah,
Or even if you do, it doesn't mean you don't have a crazy bill.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's I kind of went for that. I didn't pull back. I said, okay, let's put them in impossible situations. And yeah, like my main character, he's not wanting to be dirty. He's not wanting to be a bad cop,
Yeah.
but other people are planting the seed. And
Mhm.
he's seeing it all around him,
Right.
corruption.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like how much are you going to take before you just say, hey, I need a break. I'm gonna do some very questionable, unethical things. And that was kind of my thought. Like, eventually you're gonna get worn down, and you can rationalize a lot in a story and
Right.
as a character and be like, oh, again, I think it's almost the ultimate rationalization. I did it for my family.
Mhm.
I mean, it really is, because
Right.
you love your family this way.
Yeah, that's
There you
what
go.
we make those decisions for, right or wrong. The decisions we make for our family. So I just want to remind everyone listening. Jim Woods, his work is on Amazon. He has 4 books out, and his first is Bite the Bullet. You can get that on Amazon. The follow up to that is Like a Bad Memory, and you have the trilogy conclusion of that coming out.
The next one, Pull the Trigger, is gonna likely August, absolutely for sure September.
Okay.
I'm wrapping it up now. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think, wow, how have a trilogy of novels?
Well, that's why you feel like having a trilogy. That makes you like that's probably the goal, to have a trilogy for an author, a trilogy of something.
I'm blown away. I'm
Yeah.
pretty excited about it. It's weird, a
Mhm.
little surreal, but
Right.
also I'm kind of like, well, do I keep going with this character? Do I keep writing crime novels? What's next? Which is exciting and
Right.
a little nerve wracking, I guess, too, at the same time.
Yeah, I bet. Well, and so you don't just write novels.
Mhm.
You have other services.
Yeah.
Is also
Yeah, I'd
also.
love to help other writers with their books. Um, whether they're an established writer, maybe they're like a New York Times bestseller or a speaker, or if it's a new writer and they've always had this idea and they like might not even consider themselves to be a writer. I love kind of partnering with them and just saying, hey, let's do this together. I'll help with editing, I'll help with coaching. Maybe they've got it like almost all the way. They have a manuscript and it just needs some editing or maybe formatting, self-publishing it, putting it on Amazon. I really meet each client where they are.
Mhm.
And I really do believe like everyone has a book in them. Like everyone can write a book. I'm not saying that everyone's going to be a bestseller, but I think everyone has some story to tell or
Yeah.
some way that they can help others. And it's also cool that you don't have to write a really big, thick book. Like
Mhm.
you could write a book, for your grandkids. You could write a book for, you know, your son. I've seen that before where it's like, hey, these are words of wisdom I'm passing to my son. I'm going to give it to him when he turns 18. There's so many different things you can do. And like short stories, you could kind of, combine with a couple other writers. And
Mhm.
like with the internet now, you could make a short story collection
Mhm.
shockingly easy. Like the hardest part is frankly sending some emails and that,
Right.
or sending some text messages where you can have a short story collection. You probably want to have a connecting theme.
Mhm.
Maybe it's love, or maybe it's redemption, or something central to kind of keep it together. But you could totally do that. And it's, I know a lot of bloggers that have a blog, but then they never put out a book.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, one of the things I love to do is I'm like, well, why not repurpose it, put it
Mhm.
in a book? Because some people might not find your website.
Mhm.
But if you leave a book somewhere or hand a book to someone, it's the ultimate like business card. It's the ultimate way to connect.
Right.
So even if you had like a small business, or like a yoga teacher, words of
Mhm.
wisdom, things you've learned,
Putting it
that
in
would be
book form.
memorable. And I mean, we're talking, it could be really, really affordable and
Right.
cool.
Mhm.
Just to be like, hey, yeah, I'm a yoga teacher here.
Mm.
Even if I don't use it, I'm probably not throwing away that book.
Yeah, right.
I'd probably, one of those little libraries,
Mhm.
or something like that, or
Right. Or I know someone who's really into yoga, and I could pass that along.
right, or even Shelf Life, the local bookstore
Right.
here. Like you're probably going to do something and spread that story. So
Right.
it's kind of exciting to me. It's almost like even if it doesn't land with you or it doesn't land with me, that doesn't mean there isn't a great home for it somewhere.
Mhm.
And it really excites me that that could actually be someone's favorite book
Mhm.
that you kind of passed on.
Right.
And like to have a small role in it for me as a writer and as a coach and editor, like that's one of the most meaningful things I think I could do. I mean, yes, I'd love to reach more readers and that they love my book, but frankly, that's still a little too me focused.
Mhm.
I really want to help others more than
Right.
just look at me.
Yes.
Um, So, editing a book, like I have an example here. Um, Gary Durbin is my worship leader at the church I go to, Redemption, where he wrote a book literally for worship leaders. And it's reached tons of other worship leaders, which
Mhm.
is really cool.
Right.
All these other churches have been impacted
Right.
by the book. And I just kind of had to help him to the finish line with it, look it over, provide some story insights. You know what I mean? Like I didn't have the biggest role as editor,
Mm.
but it's really cool to see that's out there now.
Yeah.
And, it's a pretty popular book because there aren't that many books for worship leaders
Right.
specifically.
Mhm.
And I think that's usually if someone's like, hey, I couldn't have wrote that book without you, Jim. That just really hits me where
Yeah.
it hits me in the feels because I'm like, that's cool because to think it wouldn't exist without that assistance.
Right. Yeah. And
And that's
like you
cool.
said, we all have a book in us, or a story to tell that we need to get out.
I think so. I mean, I'm not saying everyone has to write a book like
Mhm.
a physical book. Maybe it's an audio book. Maybe it's just putting it on paper and giving it to your kids.
Yeah.
Maybe
Something
it's
together.
there's a lot of cool things you can do now.
Well, with technology, like you could.
Maybe it's just an ebook.
Yeah. Like Amazon. If you want to publish an ebook,
It's pretty
Amazon is pretty easy with that
pretty
right
fast.
now, and they'll put it on there. And so, to get that stuff down, it's just a matter of typing it and putting it together.
It is.
Getting it out, it's
is.
easy
Yeah.
once you have it together.
Yeah. Completely
So,
agree.
and I would recommend too, tell your story. I struggle with that too. Who's going to want to hear my story? But someone does
Yeah.
need to hear
Well,
it.
your voice is unique.
Yes.
My voice is unique.
Right.
And it's like personality comes into it. And like maybe And this, David, especially if you're like, I want to share, I want to host, and you're doing it right now, hosting and sharing other stories. Even if it's sharing a story, obviously with permission, but from someone else,
Mhm.
you know, pointing the spotlight somewhere else, I think that's still so meaningful. And that's kind of what I'm doing in a maybe more indirect way when I help a new writer
Right.
with their book. Like, I'm not asking to be acknowledged in it. I'm just
Right.
wanting to encourage them,
Yeah, and you can see them
give
that
them the
credit that they
support.
that they needed that. So,
And also, I mean, I'm not a former accountant. I don't have a writing
right.
English degree.
Mm.
Like, I can still tap into that, what it's like being a new writer,
Mm.
really easily. Like, it's right there.
Okay.
So I get the fear. I get the
Mhm.
why does my story matter? Questions and all
Mhm.
the concerns, and is
Right.
anyone gonna like this and all that. I get all that so much because I feel the same way.
Mhm.
And so moving past fear, putting out a story, putting out a book is like it helps to have that support versus being completely in isolation.
Mm.
It helps to know that you're not alone.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, we all have that feeling of putting something out there, how it will be received. But
right?
someone, I think, I've always learned someone needs to hear your story. Someone's going through something that you can help them with it. So that's the reason of doing it. If it helps one person,
Yeah.
that's what you need to do. But even in fiction, I think we can identify with fictional characters because it relates to real life.
Oh yeah.
So even writing fiction books, I read about this character and their struggles as a police officer
Yeah.
and bite the bullet. And so
Yeah.
maybe it helps another police officer or just someone who's struggling with those things.
I I love a line of fiction, like a piece of dialogue that is like, oh, wow, I want to underline that because that's a great perspective on this idea or this thought of life.
Right.
And I'll underline it. And I'm like, wow, that's the way that person thinks.
Hmm.
Maybe the way I think isn't right. Maybe there's a lot of truth to the way they're thinking. And sometimes, like even just a simple 2 lines of dialogue, you can get that whole person's like world perspective practically,
Hmm.
and like in a quick little snippet. And it's just
Right.
something that you're like, wow, this is like a magnifying glass, like a microscope that's zooming in really fast, really quick.
Hmm.
Whereas I don't know if you can pull that off as much in nonfiction.
Right.
You can cut a little closer to the truth, to the core.
Yeah, because you can say things through the perspective of that character that you probably couldn't say directly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, I think we think about Star Trek in the '60s is because it was set in space
Right.
outside of here that they can do things on that show that we they couldn't really talk about on TV. But because the setting was not here, they can explore those things.
I, I think it's like you can go so much deeper. You
Mhm.
can address topics that most people would never like I mentioned earlier, like my second novel, like About Memory, was really about the struggle of work and family.
Mhm.
Um, it's not like super deep, but I felt that as I was doing it, and I realized it more and more, where it was like, oh, that's the underlying thing.
Right.
And so, like, what you're going through is going to come out in your
Yeah,
story.
it is.
It's going to happen to an
Right.
extent.
Yeah.
And it's pretty revealing. It's pretty, especially if you're really direct and like open about it.
Mhm. Yeah, and so you could dig deep with those things that you couldn't do in nonfiction.
Right.
You can
Yeah.
those characters can explore those things that people can relate to. Uh, how does your faith shape how you write or how you develop your characters?
I think my faith. Well, everybody believes in something for
Right.
sure, no doubt.
Hmm.
Um, I think faith can be really tied closely to your values and the decisions you make. Granted, there are some folks that would say they're strong in faith, but they're making terrible decisions. Um,
That's why you
and
have pastors.
that's right. But I think sometimes there's like this gap of rationalization
Hmm.
that you can branch over and say, "Oh, well, this is my faith. I, I think, I think by default, because I'm a Christian, I I think almost automatically I assume that almost all my characters have some form of faith. They all believe in God, or at least that, or at least they'd be agnostic by default. Like that's the core.
Right.
I did write a pastor invite bullet now. I think I remember it, but it was a funny scene. Um, it was my main character grew up with him, and he was really mad. It was toward the end of the book, and he was like, I think the I don't want to reveal too much, but it was like it was a funny thing because it was kind of like a confessional scene, and it just you brought that up in my mind, and it was like such a unique thing because I think every character has to have faith, and I'm not sure how it comes out in my writing, but I feel like God is the ultimate creator, so where does creativity come from?
Right.
From God.
Hmm.
By default, it's coming from Him. I think that whole thing I mentioned earlier, I think we weren't streaming yet, but I said all stories are redemption stories.
Hmm.
And I think that even is kind of baked into the way we view stories.
Hmm.
Anytime you see a character that is sacrificing themselves, how can we not see Christ?
Right.
Even if that character is despicable, they're still sacrificing themselves for the greater good. I see a lot of similarities no matter what. That's like kind of tied in my mind.
Hmm.
When a character sacrifices themselves for the greater good, yeah, how can we not see Christ? But
Yeah.
I think too, it's hard to really dissect extremely well because there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't truly fully grasp,
Hmm.
especially about God.
Right.
I wrote a fact earlier today. It was like the space is like we've only like the tiniest fraction ever of space has anything in it, and I was like, wow, it's mind boggling.
Right.
Like it was like 20 decimals and then like 0.4. It was like crazy how much of space has actual planets, stars, anything in it. And I was just like, wow, how can we think that we can grasp this? It's so like words can't even express that.
Hmm.
And I think that's where it's so there's something mysterious about it. And the creative process is just really it's kind of hard to break down at times.
Yeah.
I view it more as story than
Right.
I do like creative process gets really big to me, but stories, okay, beginning, middle, and end. I can do it with stories, but like the bigger stuff, I have to kind of hone it down to a
Yeah. Well, because even in real life, faith is not simple. We're always struggling. Like, is there God? What is the role of religion? What do we do with religion that's gone wrong and harm people?
yeah,
If we're religious, but we have to make some of the choices that your characters have to make.
yeah,
But we have faith. But the situation that we're in, we've got to make some not so good
right,
choices. So how does that affect our faith? So it's not an easy
right.
thing, even in real life. Of I'm a Christian. This is it. Everything I do is always
Clean and simple,
clean. So it's not.
right?
If you that way, let us know because I've not
Right.
found that.
It's and I've been studying more Joseph Campbell,
Mm.
which the more I study mythology and stories and all religions, it makes some sense to me to view things again in that lens of story.
Mhm.
Um, just the way I view things, because it's like I'm not saying it's just sort of clean and simple, but to view it in that frame,
Right.
I can connect the dots a lot more
Mhm.
versus the blank canvas
Right.
where anything can go on.
Mhm.
But as I study more Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, I think it makes a lot more sense to me, like how it resonates.
Well, and I think that's human nature. So from the beginning, there was always this story they were telling. For a long time, it was oral stories were passed
Right.
down until we learned how to write stuff down.
Right.
Then we have the printing press.
Yep.
Now we have
Right.
emails.
Yep.
But it was always telling the story
Right.
of this is how things came to be. This is why things are like they are. But even writing on the walls of the caves,
Right.
it was a story. These animals are dangerous.
Yeah.
Don't go by them.
I see some of those, and I'm just always in shock. And like, there's just so much on those cave drawings, and
Right.
just it's almost like we want to pretend that was like so long ago, but in context of human history, it wasn't.
It wasn't,
And that's what's.
and it's not that different than us.
We're just
We just do it digitally
different
now.
forms.
Through social media, we post pictures.
Right.
That's the highest all thing is pictures and video
Yeah.
on social media.
Yeah.
If you just write text, no one sees it.
Yeah.
But if you show pictures with faces, especially,
Yeah.
people can identify with that.
Right. You're right.
And I think you're right. Every story is a redemption story. That's a story of humanity. We're here. It's not how we think it should be.
Right.
There's a problem with this earth and life. So with the redemption, okay, how do we get through this? How are we redeemed from this? And that's part of the role of religion is, okay, this is how you are.
Right.
In the discussion, okay, so what does that mean?
Yeah.
But that's really the story of humanity is redemption. We're here somehow. It's not as it should be.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do we end up through this?
I just, there's so much we can learn through stories that we really connect with, and we can like revisit them and learn more and get much more perspective on characters and why they did the things they did, and even like reflecting on our own story, our own personal story. It's like, oh, I did this instinctively, but now looking back, I can kind of piece it together.
Right.
It's almost like a puzzle in a sense, where you can see once stuff starts to fit. And I think that's really creativity in our human way, is we start connecting stuff together.
Right. Yeah. So it's just trying to fit all this together, like trying to redeem ourselves, redeem the world. How do we do that? And we're trying to figure that out.
That's hard.
As we
That's a
go.
big question right there.
But then the world changes every day, especially after COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Every day is different. So what we thought we knew how to handle this is different. Just thinking politically, the last 2 weekends, we had an assassination attempt, and then we had a candidate step out of the race completely. We've had those in the past, but not within the frame of 7 days.
And we know it's history, and that's and it's like documented all around us. It's a different.
We've seen it happening live.
Right, and we're seeing it from how many different perspectives.
Yes.
Not just on the news.
When it happened in the past, it was on the newspaper. You heard about it, or the news.
Yeah.
But now those things were happening live as they were taking place. You see those things happening within 7 days of each other. Historical event, and you're just, okay, we should have 4 months left before the election.
It's unreal.
One party doesn't even have someone officially. The other one, we still don't know if that's going to be the full ticket or not. So it's scary. And you think about, how do we manage this? What's our redemption story in all of this?
I think that's why the stories are comfort. The ones we love, that we really connect with. That you're like, oh, this is my comfort show or comfort book or whatever.
Right.
I think there's something in there that just connects with us. Like, and Star Wars did it great with the hero's journey. I mean, there's no doubt most people think of the hero's journey in Star Wars like this because it was so connected together. But there's something in it where when we see that character go through and win and get redeemed and then share what they learned, bring back the boon would be the term that Joseph Campbell uses, like share it with the community. It's like going full circle.
Yeah. Well, I think even in Star Wars, like before you even knew the background of Darth Vader and Anakin, like when you saw he saved his son, he redeemed himself.
Yeah.
When he saved his son, before you even knew his backstory.
Right. It wasn't even really truly needed. It was more filling in.
Yeah, but you kind of, because you saw before, like all the bad stuff that he did, but then when he did that, that's when you felt like, okay, he saved his son.
That was the redeeming moment.
Right.
It was coming full circle. And again, sacrifice.
Yeah, everything else was just to tell the story, but you knew this, okay, that's his redemption right there. No matter what the rest of the story was, no matter what comes after that.
Yeah.
That's where you understand the story's not about Luke.
I mean,
per se. It's
yeah, right. It's really about Anakin and then his relationship with his son. And his son, like, if Luke wasn't willing to throw down his lightsaber and sacrifice himself and say,
right.
"I'm not going to fight you," Anakin's not even redeemed.
Yeah,
It's like it's that inner connection there.
right.
Um,
So without that moment, you don't have that
it
all those
doesn't
other
work.
movies or
It
shows
doesn't
or
work.
anything. But it's that moment.
It would have been a great spectacle, but it sure wouldn't have been a story because there would have been no full circle
Right.
coming around. Sure, we would have liked it like we do a thrill ride, like it's a roller
Right.
coaster of a movie, but it's not a full story.
Which makes you think, like, so they started with 4, 5, and 6. Why do we need that? But you needed that redemption story.
It was
See,
filling in the
yeah,
it was filling in the beginning is
right.
what but yeah, and it's funny because this is one thing I'll keep it short and sweet, but like it's easy to confuse the two, like spectacle
hmm
and story, and nostalgia is so powerful now.
Right.
But a quick example, like Jurassic World is a spectacle. It
Right.
is not a story. It's not even close.
Right.
It's a thrill ride with dinosaurs, but like Jurassic Park is a story where you see characters change and it's like a full, complete story. Whereas, and I always wonder sometimes, like, did everything change with Jurassic World? Was that like a real landmark moment where we became more about big explosions and CGI and more like it doesn't matter about the story? It's more just keep you entertained.
Right. Can you keep me here for
Yeah.
2 hours?
Yeah.
There's no character development. But I think we're kind of coming back to that too, of developing characters and connecting with them. Like when you look at like Harry Potter and that his journey of his story, the more you read through it, I find Harry's not really the focal point of a lot of parts of that. He's called the main character, but you look at the stories of others, they're just as integral in that. But even like without his mom sacrificing herself,
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So you need that part for him to have that story. And so you go on that journey. Even the more you learn about Voldemort, his story, his journey to where he got to that place,
Right.
you kind of see. I don't like him, but in some points you kind of see the journey that he took, to where he led him to be that way, and what he was dealing with.
Yeah.
You take it in real life. Well, he kind of had a mental health illness that was not treated.
I mean, that's the case with so many villains. So it's like, wow, we're just big ego, hubris. It's such a common thing. And as you mentioned Harry Potter, I was like, orphans is such a common thing.
Well, you see that, yeah.
Luke Skywalker.
Well, now that you've learned, like, yeah. Batman was, like Bruce Wayne was, Harry was.
Even Superman, essentially.
Well, yeah.
And it's like not having those ties to community.
Right.
We're cheering for them by default.
Right. And
that's the underdog.
The reason you're an orphan, you lost your parents.
I mean, all of Disney, every single one, it's like something happened to the parents. Frozen, Cinderella, and it's like over and over.
You lost your foundational community.
Exactly.
And that's gone, and so that's where your story developed.
Yeah.
Coming from decisions that you make are based within that.
Yeah, it ups the stakes because you're wanting them to win and get redeemed.
Well, I think that's why we justify Batman so much. Yeah. It's because he lost. Like most stories that you read, like he witnessed that happen. He witnessed losing his parents.
Right.
In most versions of that. And so you can he lost his parents.
Right.
That's the most horrible thing that can happen to a person, to a child, to see that.
Yeah.
So you can kind of justify whatever he does. It comes that, well, he lost his parents, so it's okay.
Yeah. Like revenge stories in this context, Batman's taking revenge on all criminals in Gotham. With that context, it's like, no wonder they're really redemption stories. You're righting a wrong.
Yes.
In a sense. And like, I think that's why I actually like that theme. It's not about revenge. It's about injustice and finding justice. I think that's why it's one of those themes I constantly come back to because you need someone to lose something.
Right. Without that, there's no story.
Yeah.
It's the journey. And I think for all of us, we're all trying to figure out justice.
It's hard.
Even if you've lost parent to old age. Part of the process of grief is struggling with that. Why did this happen?
Right.
Even though you've spent all this time with them, and we know like death is a part of life, there's still a part of that grief of what could I have done differently?
Yeah, that's the ultimate question.
Could I give them a few more years?
What could I have done? How could I have handled this differently?
What didn't I do when they were still here?
Yeah.
And so there's still that process in that story that we have. And so trying to connect that story to that's all of our story is redemption.
Right. And I think another take on it, it's not just redemption. I've heard this one. I'm not sure I'm 100% on it, but I'll share it with you, and I love your thoughts because I heard someone say all problems are story problems. And I've been like batting that idea
Right.
around. I'm like, I guess with perspective and context, that does make some sense.
Yeah, it does. It's intriguing to me. And I think of the context of a pastor. So, all of it, all problems are sermon stories.
Yeah.
That you could. So I think all problems are, if we take the time to understand that it's a story. We just have to understand the story. I think we don't take the time to understand the story.
Yeah. Or what
That's
story are you telling yourself? Because I
Mhm.
constantly, like, as a writer, I'm like, okay, this happened because this happened. Like it's like those metal balls that connect, this chain reaction.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, this happened because this happened because this happened. And I'm like usually tracing around like that.
Right.
But what if I'm wrong?
Mhm.
What if I'm only looking at it through this lens of this story right here in front of me?
Right.
But there's 360,
Mhm.
all around me, all these other angles that I could
Right.
look at. But I'm only looking right in front
We're
of me.
looking at this, especially with trauma. When we've been traumatized, much of our perspective is through the scope of that trauma.
Right.
And so, but that's not the only scope of life, or even the only scope of the story
Right.
of our lives. But that's how we see it. And unless we can go get some help with that, we can maybe then see other perspectives.
Yeah.
But when we've been traumatized, much of our scope of that is
That's a
viewed
big
towards that, but there's other views to look at it. And we have
And
to.
you almost accept those as total truths.
Yes, exactly.
And then this is how it
And
is.
so everything outside of that is wrong. It
Yeah.
can't be. It's too dangerous. Or, if we're
Yeah.
religious and have faith, God is within this framework of my traumatic experience.
Right.
And that's how I see it.
Is the problem.
And so anything outside of that, it's not God.
Yeah.
And so that's really, I think it is. All problems are stories. It's just we're only looking at one perspective of that story because maybe we're fearful.
How do you think we can broaden
Uh,
our horizons more?
uh, I think through faith, I think helps.
Sure.
But I think understanding that God is outside of that trauma.
Right. Well, even I mentioned the space thing.
Yes.
It's like if it's 20 zeros and then like 0.00020 times, then like 0.4 is actually the universe that has stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like mind-boggling.
Right.
Where it's like, okay, this is an idea
Yeah.
of how much bigger things are.
Yes, and I think going back to trauma. I don't downplay. I've been through traumatic experience in my life growing up too. It's our trauma. It's real to us, but it's also not the only traumatic experience in life, and it's not the whole scope of reality. And so, we're not downplaying our own trauma. We need to deal with our own trauma, but also understanding that there's more to us than that trauma. Our trauma does not have to define us, and that's one way we deal with it. Part of you do mental health counseling. Some cases, medication help through that. Sometimes confronting the traumatic experience, but you got to have the means to do that safely.
I'll be honest, David. That right there, I think, is one of the ultimate reasons to write your story.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not saying do it unsupervised and do it in a haphazard manner. I'm not saying that at all. Because, like you said, mental health professionals absolutely use them. And sometimes I feel like I'm becoming one by default, being an editor, being a writer, embracing.
That's what I thought earlier when you were talking about
trauma.
Editing for people.
I mean, I feel like I'm not in that ballpark, but I'm in that arena. I'm getting that closer to that.
Right.
But like processing, and here's the cool thing: you do it through fiction. Nobody knows what's real, what's false.
Right.
At all. Everyone I talk to who wants to write a memoir, I'm like, you're going to be worried about Aunt Sally and Uncle June and all these people.
Right.
What are they going to think? Am I saying too much? Are they going to come at me negative backlash?
Right.
Do it in fiction. Change the names. Nobody knows what's true
Right.
but you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something just like soothing,
Right.
healing, and restoring about it. And here's the other best part, like, you don't have to publish the
I was gonna say you don't have to have it published. You did it for yourself.
Yeah, and it's like that restoration, that healing. You could do what you choose, and you might change your mind. You might say, "Oh, I'm just going to set it aside," and then 5 years later, you publish it.
Right.
Okay.
So you're
especially if you're in a different, healthier place. That might represent somebody you don't even remember.
Right.
So
I think I find that writing, it doesn't have to be a true story. But fiction doesn't mean it's not true. It just means the characters are not real people that we're identifying with. But if it's fiction, you can combine aspects of different characters you've come across and break them into different characters. But it gets it out of here into here.
Yeah.
But you're not carrying that.
Yeah, it's like boulders off of your shoulders.
Right.
And just like,
and if you write with the intention of not publishing it, you don't have to worry about deadlines from editors and that.
No. And
you just
like one thing I'm always pushing. I constantly push, like, what do you really mean? That's a question I ask a lot as an editor. Like, what are you really trying to say? I feel like you're tap dancing around this, or what are you really, really trying to get at?
Right.
And often just, or maybe it's questions in that ballpark. But as I talk to that writer, they might be like, oh, well, I guess I'm not sure. I haven't processed this, right?
Right.
And it's usually trauma related or fear related or something like that. It's been such a process. Like, the fear component is so huge with everyone. Most people would prefer death over public speaking, which is, kudos to you being a pastor speaking all the time, right?
Right.
I'm not like a public speaker. I'll do workshops and I like chatting with you, but like, most people don't want to do public speaking.
Right.
But if you were to embrace that fear and do it,
right,
it's not that bad. And then with the writing, like, embrace the fear. What is it that you're really scared about? Maybe it was disconnection or sharing some of these bad things that did happen. Well, do it with fiction and share your story. And guess what? You might even provide some healing for other people too by sharing that.
Right. And even if you write it in fiction, the main character does not have to be you or your name. Give them, but they're just carrying some of the burden that you've carried, that you identified. So they don't have to take on everything that you've experienced.
No. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
You can
explore one part of that trauma that you've been through.
And it doesn't have to be like, again, a whole book. You can write a short story. You don't even have to put parameters on it. Be like, I'm just going to start something and
see where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to like make it harder on yourself. I have a friend who's also a writer, and she was writing part of her story, and I could tell how powerful it was. And it is traumatic sometimes. It is really hard and it's painful. But on the other side of that is healing.
Right.
And the publishing, it almost becomes irrelevant, frankly, as long as you are a better person for having gone through it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel with some of my novels. Like, I don't really control that much results. I don't. I mean, I can do my best, but some of it, I just, I want to become a better father and husband, and I want to do these things and grow. I don't want to like be the same person I was a year ago.
Exactly. I don't. I don't either. Even that I was last week, the same person. But even like, it's probably best if you do write this for yourself, not to try to publish it if it's still something you're processing actively.
Talk it through with your therapist, man, and or your counselor, or maybe it is too raw. But guess what? It might be an outline or a template that you want to use later. So maybe
now is not the time, but down the road it could be a time. I got to get this story out to help someone else.
And I think that's the key, that helps someone else. I love that, because I like attach that so much, where like I want to take everything I'm learning and learning about where I'm growing, what's helped me, and like share it and pass it on to other writers who hopefully can do the same. And I think that's kind of my mindset of it where, hey, I learned this. David, did you see this book? Did you check this out?
Mhm.
There's something powerful in me carrying it forward.
Mhm.
That's kind of that oral tradition you talked
Right.
about earlier, storytelling. I think there's something powerful. Like if these tips or tricks or insights or stories can help you
Right.
on your journey,
Mhm.
I love that.
Right. Amen. So as we wrap up, what is one piece of advice you want to give to an inspiring writer out there?
Lean into the fear,
Mhm.
as scary and crazy as that sounds. And you might not want to do that completely on your own.
Mhm.
And I'm not just pushing myself, like, talk to other writers, talk to good friends who are really open with you, talk to a counselor. It's so much easier when you have support to do the writing versus doing it solo because self doubt comes in and then you rationalize, and it's so much easier to not write, and that becomes a habit than it is to write. But like if you get some support, and I'm thinking of a good friend of mine, local, who's helped me so much, and he's like one of the most powerful things he tells me, I believe in you.
Mhm.
And I'm like, ooh,
Right.
this guy believes in me. Like he's written 50 books.
Wow.
He believes in me.
Mhm.
Wow. I think all of us kind of feel like a beginner and we're scared.
Yeah.
But when someone says, hey, I believe in you, and you get some support,
Right.
that makes a big difference. So, yeah, get some support, and it can look however you want it to look. Maybe it's emailing me, maybe it's emailing another writer, maybe it's, listening to a podcast. I did a podcast for a while. I've kind of tapered away a little bit, but it was like Write Your Book podcast.
Mhm.
And I would just share insights and thoughts and like what I'm going through kind of behind the scenes.
Right.
And I like stuff like that where you can find support. It doesn't always look the same.
Mhm.
Like support could be, picking up a book on writing. Like Stephen King wrote a great book on writing. Literally, that's the title, On Writing. But get some support. Don't go in alone. I think that's the number one thing.
Okay. Thank you. So, Jim, I want to thank you for being with us today. And we put links in the comments for Jim's website, for Amazon, into his website to help connect you with more writing tools. And also, we put his links to Amazon for his book. So, Jim, I want to thank you for joining with us today. And we're excited to have the part 3 of the trilogy coming out this fall by September.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited too.